Hello and welcome back to another Raw Sport Quaran-stream. I think in the video title will say the 11th one we've done for the year or something like along those lines. It's been another action-packed week of football, a lot of Premier League football actually. It felt like that weekend went on for a while. But yeah, we are back to sort of look at it all. Obviously, Champions League coming up as well, which is exciting. So a lot of that to kind of have a look forward to. So thank you for watching. If you are watching, we are pre-recording this, so you'll probably see this on a Saturday evening onwards. But yeah, I am your head of sport, Josh Sim. Pronounce he, him. Thank you for watching. And obviously in the video description, we've got our social media links, so please give them a follow. We will put up the social medias of everyone on the panel today as well. And some quick announcements. Obviously, you'd have seen Raw did a Women's Week over the last week, and please check out that programming because it's really good programs from the news department, from the arts department, from all our departments. We weren't on the slate, and the reason why was for scheduling issues. So we did have an interview, but it was just pushed back due to conflict of schedules and sort of something like that. So we have two interviews coming up. The second one, I can't really say much. The first one is, and I'm only saying this because I think it's going ahead. I'm pretty sure it's going ahead, but as you know, we'll see what happens. But on Monday, we should be recording something with Katie Smith, who is the BBC Newsbeat for the sports section. She's the reporter on BBC Newsbeat, so across BBC Radio. So that's super exciting. And the second one, I can't really, because it hasn't really been sort of finalized. So I don't really want to say, but a young female footballer who I think is we sort of met recently, and she's a really, really interesting person to talk to. So very excited to have her on one of our Raw Sport interviews. So you've got those two things coming up. Hopefully one is definitely next week. The other one, touch and go, we'll see. But it's good to have some interviews with women. Obviously, International Women's Day coming out on Monday, I think, the 8th of March. But also, just doing interviews with loads of women because it's their perspectives on sports really interesting. So regardless of when we do it, Women's Week or not. So very excited to sort of say and we'll sort of announce those two things are coming. And we will, if you follow social media, we will let you know when exactly they drop on YouTube and our podcast feed and our Facebook page as well. So with that all sort of out the way, I will bring on our guest today, pretty much the same panel as last week, minus Joe Spagnoli, who, I don't know, he's probably had his big birthday celebration and is still probably hungover a week later. I don't know. We have our sports deputy with us, Ben Parkinson. Ben, how are you?
Hi, Josh. Yeah, very well, thank you. Excited to be on. A lot to talk about. Premier League double game week has just gone and Champions League is back, like you said. So it should be a good one.
Yep. It certainly there was a lot of things. And let's bring on the ball spoiler to Luke James. Luke, Ben, actually, you mentioned a double game week. And I know we don't talk a whole lot of fantasy Premier League, but obviously it's well known we have a league. It was quite disappointing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't a great week. And I agonized for days and days and days about kind of, do you triple captain Kane? Do you triple captain someone else and try and get a differential? And then he didn't really score that much. So yeah, it was a bit disappointing to be completely honest.
Yeah, it definitely was. And then finally we'll bring on Anton Larsen as well. Anton, thanks for coming on. How are you going at the moment?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Good to be back. As you say, an interesting week of football and another one coming off again.
Absolutely. So I guess we'll just dive into it. I mean, the big one, and we sort of talked about it last week. So no surprises. We're probably going to start with the headline. Liverpool in a bit of trouble, at the moment. Obviously got the win against Sheffield United, but then backed that up with just a misfiring display against Chelsea, a 1-0 defeat. So let's start then. I'll come to you, Anton, I guess, as you talked about last week how important these two games were going to be. Have your thoughts, I guess, to start with, have your thoughts changed with those two games now done and dusted? Or is it still, has anything changed in your thinking, or are you still kind of same stances as then?
I mean, I remain as pessimistic as I was last week. Last week, I said Liverpool needed 4 points out of these two games, a win at least against Sheffield United, and at least a draw against Chelsea. I don't see Liverpool being able to compete with the top 4 teams at the moment. And I see it a very, very difficult end to the season for them. I almost have come to the point where I think that the easiest route for them to enter Champions League football next year is to win the Champions League. And even that is a big statement to say, as Liverpool doesn't seem a team that can compete with those big European giants at the moment. I thought that the Sheffield United win again was a standard win. It didn't show, it wasn't vintage Liverpool. Liverpool didn't run over Sheffield. Again, a difficult team to break down. But it wasn't a spectacular performance, and the Chelsea game didn't do anything to repair that. Liverpool was disappointing going forward, as they have been in the last couple of weeks. And I thought Chelsea thoroughly merited the win ahead of them. Defensively, they didn't look they didn't look incredibly weak, but they weren't strong and imposing like we have seen them be in previous seasons. I'm very preoccupied about Liverpool's form at the moment and worried about where it can go and how it's going to go for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I think what was most striking to me, Luke, was, and I heard Michael Cox talk about it recently, it's that it's not only, we've talked at length about the defensive issues, and in fact, Ozan Kabak has picked up an injury in the Chelsea game and is unlikely to play this weekend, which is another centre back stripped away from their stocks at the moment, their limited stocks, I should say, but. The feature, I guess, of this game was that not only defensively, defensively they did okay, I guess. It's more the attack is becoming more and more of a concern. With the likes of Mo Salah, Sadio Mane, and Roberto Firmino just unable to kind of conjure up that spark and that connection that they had forged in previous seasons. Yeah,
for sure. Liverpool weren't very good basically against Chelsea, whether let's be completely honest, it was a fairly routine victory for Chelsea. And I think one of the questions that Klopp was asked after the game by BBC Radio was this too comfortable a victory for Chelsea? And he rejected that idea. He said, look, we pressed them well, we put them in trouble under spells, this kind of stuff. And he was talking about kind of the things Liverpool were doing off the ball. And yeah, in that respect, Liverpool did make Chelsea's life somewhat difficult when Chelsea were in possession, but Chelsea themselves aren't the finished article going forwards. But Liverpool, considering how good offensively they've been over the past couple of years, it was just, as you said, kind of on the shy run, it was just blunt from them. They didn't really offer much going forwards at all. And I think one of the most troubling things at the moment as well is, of course, Klopp substituted Salah, who's on, I think, 17 Premier League goals for this season. It's just a question of when you make those changes, who is going to come off the bench and make the difference for you? And it doesn't really matter who it is. It doesn't matter what profile that player is. I think there just has to be a belief in this Liverpool team that someone can come on and score. And at the minute, it's just kind of looking around and saying, okay, where does the next goal come from? And kind of over the next couple of weeks, kind of between now and the end of the season, they have to play Arsenal, Aston Villa, Leeds, and Manchester United. They're kind of the more difficult games that Liverpool have. And I think that's basically where we find out what this team is made of. Because if they can't come away with a positive record from those matches, then, as kind of Anton said, the idea of qualifying for the Champions League through the league is done and dusted.
Yeah, and I mean, there's been a lot of talk about, and you mentioned there are some tough fixtures. Obviously, I think the most immediate ones that you said, Wolves away coming up next week after this game week, obviously, then Arsenal away, and even Fulham at home this week Fulham are much improved defensively of late. Scott Parker's really got them playing some stuff, and then Luke mentions the Mo Salah substitution, and he clearly wasn't very happy. I think his agents then sort of tweeted out or messaged out something in the public to illustrate that discontent. What does that do to the players' confidence, and what does that do to, I guess, squad morale? Because as what is a common trait in football, as soon as you go on a bad run and sort of start questioning, I guess, the people and the methods and players around you, is that a major concern if you were a Liverpool fan?
I think it definitely is a concern. I think the thing is with Mo Salah as well, he's not just been Liverpool's top goal scorer or best player over the last couple of seasons. He's almost been Liverpool's kind of poster boy for being that, smart signing who's ruthless in front of goal, one of probably the most selfish Premier League wingers we've seen over the last decade. And he's been absolutely phenomenal. So for him to bring Mo Salah off, of course, that will probably not just disrupt Mo Salah, but it will also disrupt the squad around him. And I think, Luke made a really good point there about the front three, and it is worrying. And the thing is with Liverpool's front three, they've actually been together as a front three a lot longer than historical Premier League front threes. If you look at sort of other great front threes, the one that comes to mind for me is Rooney, Ronaldo and Tevez. I mean, they were only together for, I think, a year, 2 years, whereas this Liverpool front three have been together for now, I think, coming on 4 years. So, they've been together a long time, and I think they're at they're getting to the late 20s. They're probably going to seek one last move or one last club away if they sign a contract. So I think, you're looking at potentially maybe a lack of motivation. I think it's not. I think it looks almost likely now that Mo Salah will depart in the summer. I think with Jota coming in, you've got a replacement there already. I think it's more likely that Sadio Mane and Roberto Firmino will stay. However, a lot of Liverpool fans have spoken about how they're not necessarily convinced about Roberto Firmino. So you almost feel as if it is the beginning of the end for this front three. They're maybe going to break up a little bit. I imagine, in my mind, Sadio Mane will be the probably most likely one to stick around. But still, I think that Mo Salah will possibly seek a move away from Liverpool in the summer. And I think, that maybe sums up the lack of confidence and lack of motivation. They're never going to come out and say they don't have motivation. They're never going to go into a game not feeling motivated. But again, I just think it's that little thing in the back of the mind, maybe knowing they're not going to sign a new long-term deal with Liverpool, knowing that maybe at the end of this season they will seek a move. Of course, that's going to impact your form. And, Luke made a really good point there. They've relied on that front three. I remember when the defense was really poor and basically they had to outscore position. It was basically if they concede 3 goals, it doesn't matter because they'd go and score 5. But at the moment, they can't rely on that front three. And a defense that's fragile and is, really kind of down to its spine. And then you've got, your midfielders out as well, or even if they're in, they're kind of playing in defense, then you really need to rely on these front attacking players to get you some goals, and they're just not doing that at the moment. So it is worrying for Liverpool fans, and I don't want to sound too doom or gloom, but they were almost kind of their last hope. So I think they really need them to kick on against Fulham. It's going to be a tough game, but they need to start establishing some form again, because Liverpool need to rely on that front three for the rest of the season if they're going to get anything out of it.
It's interesting what you say, Ben, about I guess we have seen in recent years, more recently than sort of at the beginning of his Liverpool tenure, but obviously Mo Salah has been linked with a move away. And in fact, I don't think he's come out and said, I want to stay at Liverpool. I feel like there's always been sort of this question mark looming over him. I read something that said he hasn't the ambition to be the greatest African footballer apparently in history or something, and he feels that a move away may be the way to enable that sort of achievement. Anton, Ben talks about the potentially the front three having to maybe break up or change it up for the next season. Would you entertain an offer for a Mo Salah, Sadio Mane, Roberto Firmino? What would you do with regards to the front three at the moment? Because clearly at the moment it's not working, and would you see what changes would you make to them, and maybe even the players, I guess, behind them, the pecking order as well?
I think the key point, whilst we might say that the three of them are tired and they want to break up or that they want to seek a move away, that's possible. You could look at the financial reward of that. I think whilst Mo Salah has not had the best season he's had since he started at Liverpool, he remains the Premier League top goal scorer. The transfer fee won't be a little one for him, and perhaps that's placed to gain some more resources from elsewhere for Liverpool. But I think the key point is as well, you've got to look at the backup that Liverpool have, the competition within that squad. Jota's just come back from injury. Perhaps that's another spark again for the front three to start competing once again, like they did at the beginning of the season. But again, he's been out for 4 months, and the only person behind them without Jota is Divock Origi, from my point of view. And I don't think Divock Origi, while he has been a hero, while he did score that goal against Barcelona, while he did score that goal against Tottenham Hotspur in the Champions League final, I don't think he is sufficient to compete with Mo Salah and to give him that motivation to move forward. And even speaking there, there's only 2 players that can really compete with the front three, and past them I don't see another alternative. So I think it's more important to look at what Liverpool really can bring in. Of course, there's been the big transfer rumours about Kylian Mbappe. I think that's perhaps a bit of an exaggeration. Whilst as a Liverpool fan, I do entertain that thought. I don't think that's realistic, but I think the key point for Liverpool at the moment is to bring some form of reinforcement in, that when the front three are misfiring like they are at the moment, that they have some motivation and some competition to fight off, rather than seeking to push players out to bring players in instead.
Of course, Luke, I guess the counterpoint to that, to making any moves regarding getting players out the exit or bringing them in, is that we are in a pandemic, and we've seen obviously Barcelona, their financial issues are documented. They would be a potential suitor for Mo Salah, you would think. Obviously, it's hard for them to, they're trying to keep Messi at the moment, and who knows how much he's going to want them to pay up to keep him. Or Real Madrid also have sort of moved away from buying a superstar Galactico. Yes, I know they made a move for Eden Hazard, and that even that move may cause caution because that hasn't really worked out for them as well as they would have hoped. So I guess the issue at the moment is that, are you going to find a suitor for these players who may be willing to not spend as much money anymore in this current climate? And I guess then the other one is, who can Liverpool bring in to replace such a player? Because you'd think Mbappe is sort of out of their price tag at the moment, given their strategy of buying not exactly the superstar, but the player about to become a superstar, given their transfers. So I guess, those concerns, I guess, should they temper any expectation from fans to kind of change up the front three?
The situation with Liverpool's attackers is, as you say, is really complicated and really difficult to solve, because, when we talk about Mo Salah, where would Mo Salah move to? Because Barcelona have, as you say, horrible finances at the moment. That's going to be really difficult for them to pull that off. And again, Real Madrid are in a similar situation. So I think it's really important to remember that we're talking about, in Mo Salah's instance, like the top scorer in the Premier League. So this, as Anton said, isn't going to be a player who anyone is going to be able to buy cheaply. So I think it's a little bit, especially in the market as it is now, it's a little bit unrealistic to think that we're going to see huge change at Liverpool, because I don't think that's just how the club has approached the last couple of years. I think the thing that ultimately needs to change, and I think a lot of the time people in the media talk about the mindset and all this kind of stuff. And I was listening to one of the BBC's podcast where Jermaine Genius was saying, well, look, Liverpool they're not quite attacking the same. They're not throwing bodies forward in the same way, all this kind of stuff. A similar point was made by Chris Sutton. But the difference is, and the difficulty this year, is this isn't the Liverpool of 2019-20. This is Liverpool of 2020-21. And ultimately, the wheels have just fallen off because of circumstances. And again, it's important to remember that we're living through really horrific times in general. So I think it's not that surprising that Liverpool would be struggling at this point. Again, that's not an excuse. I just think it's an explanation of what has happened. So even if they don't kind of build again next year, and even if they do stick with some of the components in the front three in the next season, I don't think that's the end of the world for Liverpool, because I think things will get better. If I was Liverpool and I wanted to replace one of the front three, I'd get rid of Firmino, simply because Salah and Mane score lots of goals. Firmino doesn't really offer that, and I think the way in which you can change the attack for Liverpool and make it better is to offer something different through the middle. Salah is world-class, Mane is world-class. I don't think Firmino is world-class. So even if you brought in someone who's a completely different style to Firmino, you then can change the way that you attack. It means that next year you have something different up front. It means that other teams in the Premier League aren't quite as sure about how you're going to attack them. And I think that's basically how you change Liverpool and make them better, and you make them more unpredictable. And that's essentially how you return them to kind of competing for the Premier League again. So if one of the three has to go, definitely Firmino for me. And that's not even saying he's a bad player, because he's definitely not. I just think if you want change at Liverpool, the easiest way to do that is to get rid of the player who's probably going to sell for the least. And then you can make a bigger kind of change to the style of play.
Yeah, it's interesting given Firmino's sort of distinctive role in this Liverpool team. He's not, he's asked to do things that most strikers aren't asked to do. To illustrate your point with the finances, obviously this is Liverpool who earlier tried to furlough some of their employees and obviously faced a bit of a backlash for doing so. And it's, financially they are not, while they are, obviously one of the top teams in England, financially they're not immune to such pressures. And if you think about, not there being suitors for Salah and the likes of Firmino and Mane, then imagine how hard it is to find a suitor for Divock Origi or Shaqiri or someone like that as well. So interesting stuff. I mean, Ben, let's talk about what they can do in the short term. Obviously, Diogo Jota is coming back, which, I mean, if you'd asked me if that was going to be a big move for him to be back at the start of the season, I may not have sort of seen that, but obviously he has shown just how good he can be in this Liverpool team and shown his growing importance. So in the short term, would you assume, I mean, obviously Jota needs a few more games to obviously bring him up to speed, but when he is fully up to speed, would you consider starting him in the team, and would you switch the formation around to accommodate him, or would you take one of the existing front three out at the moment?
I think 100% Jota has to come straight in when he's back fit and ready to come in, because, you know, at the end of the day, if your players aren't scoring, then you take them out. If they are scoring, then you keep them in. It's just simple kind of like football basics, if you like. So I think, yeah, Jota needs to come straight in. And the thing is as well, I think, you know, a fresh face coming back from injury, you know, it can just inspire other players. And that's not just the other attackers, some of the midfielders, you know, working with a front player who makes different runs, that can really help. So I think, yeah, it's really real plus for Liverpool to have him back, just have a fresh face who actually, you know, can be a mainstay in that team coming back. So I think definitely a plus for them. Regarding changing things around, I think only Jurgen Klopp can really answer that. You know, I don't think this is, you know, he shouldn't fear experimentation. You know, they're not in a good way right now. They need to win these games. They are tough games coming up as well. You know, they may not be the teams right at the top of the table, but they're teams who definitely have a defensive stability and rigidity about them, or play in sort of, you know, certain ways, like Leeds, for example. So, you know, there's a lot of kind of adapting week by week that Liverpool are going to have to do. So they probably are going to have to look to change some formations and change some things to get people in. But I think, you know, realistically, I think Liverpool, they just need to almost, and it's obviously much easier said than done, but just go back to their fundamentals and basics that make them such a good team. Having those engines in midfield, and I know it's harder when you don't have as many midfielders available, but having those workhorses in midfield, you know, trying to get a partnership that can stay together and trying to get a front three that's scoring. It's just trying to focus and get as many of those kind of components working again as possible. But again, it's circumstance. It's just, I mean, of course they want to go and establish a good centre-back partnership, but they literally haven't been able to, so it's not their fault. So I feel sorry for them for that sense. So I really hope that from a neutral perspective, Jota can get back and can sort of revitalise this Liverpool team, maybe give them a bit of energy, but and give them a bit of life, because I think they're going to need it. And one player can make that difference coming back from an injury. And Diogo Jota was on fire before he got injured for Liverpool in the Champions League. He was ruthless. And I think definitely if the front three continue sort of playing the way they are at the moment, then 100% he'll be in there.
Yeah, I remember during our sort of team of the season, which was we did that around a third of the season into it, or a quarter of the season into it. I think we had Jota, if not in the team, definitely in the conversation. So certainly his addition would inspire things. And you mentioned going back to the fundamentals. I just wanted to ask Anton, because obviously the defense, the new thing, I guess, is they've been playing with a really high defensive backline to accommodate the changes made to the offside rule, that being that VAR will pinpoint offside breaches a lot more clearly, and there would be less risk, I guess, playing with a high back line, because you'd assume the referees were going to catch them out, no matter how minuscule the breach is, as we've come to find. Does Jurgen Klopp need to amend that slightly and bring, I guess, his players closer to goal, the back line closer to goal? Because we've seen, and we'll get onto Chelsea in a bit, but obviously Timo Werner at speed was able to kind of cause some problems. Looking ahead to the Fulham game, I know, Fulham's attack hasn't been as sort of sturdy as their defense, but you have the likes of Ademola Lookman has speed, Josh Maja has got speed. Even someone like a Rufus Loftus-Cheek could kind of burst from midfield as well. Does that high back line need evaluating and possibly adjusting and tweaking at the moment?
Perhaps that you could well be right there. I think that for me, that's the way Liverpool have been playing for years, right? That's the way they've been. That's what we recognise them as, both in the Champions League winning season and in the title winning season last season. And when Ben says go back to basics, that's what I sort of think of for Liverpool, is that high line, that really rigid and strong line that doesn't go wrong very frequently. I think the problem for Klopp at the moment is that he has, first of all, that impossibility of finding a strong partnership at the back, and then he has the new incoming defenders, which I don't expect 2 games in to be able to play up to that standard yet. Perhaps you could say that they should step further back, make a bit more time for themselves, and create a bit more space for themselves to play. But I think it's important to keep what they have, the principle that they have developed over the past 2 seasons, and rather than change it to get the defenders that they brought in accustomed to that system, and then push on from there. I think Ben is completely right when he says go back to basics. Liverpool need to create that strong line at the back, then redevelop that midfield, create that hungry midfield again, and then push forward with a front 3. I think that actually the key point is to keep that line as it is. Whilst they were very, very close with Timo Werner, I would argue that it was almost controversially denied. But I think that you got to keep that line and keep pushing as it was before.
Yeah, and I sort of think the only other sort of team in Europe who play with such a high line is Bayern Munich, and they've obviously had their successes, but also, if you want, certainly more in the Bundesliga than the Champions League for some reason, but they have been breached a fair few times as well. So there is risk and reward with playing that sort of way. We'll wrap it up with, they've got 2 games this week, so let's just briefly address sort of predictions for that. We'll just Liverpool, Fulham. Is anyone else who, I'm assuming the majority of you think Liverpool home win. Does anyone sort of not disagree, but sort of think it's going to go in any other way?
I think Fulham could very well push Liverpool here. Liverpool's home form is, first of all, really shocking at the moment, but I think Fulham had a really strong game against Spurs. They were unlucky. I thought that they should have had that goal. And their defence looks really solid at the moment. But Liverpool's misfire in front 3, I think they could cause Liverpool some problems very easily. Yeah, absolutely.
And then assuming that Liverpool then take that win, they've obviously got to go back to Budapest to play Leipzig on Wednesday night. Obviously they lead. Is it 2-0, 3-0? I should know this. It's 2-0 from the first leg. Do we expect them to lose that lead? Does anyone want to contribute, just share their thoughts? Do we expect them to lose that lead, or do we feel like they'll be okay doing a job, getting maybe a draw or something, and that being enough to get them through?
Yeah, I think they should be able to get through here. I think we've seen over the past couple of years, the Champions League can act as almost kind of an escape from the league. If you look at when Real Madrid won it, they had a really poor league season. I remember when Chelsea won it as well, they were like 9th or 10th or something in the league. So I'm not saying Liverpool are going to win it by any means, but I'm saying that sometimes the Champions League can actually act as a bit of a kind of escapism for a club. So I think from that sense, it could be a little bit beneficial to Liverpool. And I think they should be able to get through this league. I think they're a club that's won it. They've got experienced players, not even necessarily on the pitch, but around the team. And all they really need to do is going to get through that match. They've done the hard work and they just need to get through it. Leipzig can cause them problems. I think I would, if Leipzig did it, I wouldn't kind of came back from that. I wouldn't be massively shocked, but I'd expect Liverpool to do this with all the problems they've got going on, the experience they've got in and around that team, the experience they've got as a coach. I think they should be able to just get through this match. And I think, you can almost treat the Champions League as it is, a completely separate competition from the league. And hopefully they can maybe build some form in there.
In a way, Luke, and just to wrap up, with Liverpool-Leipzig, it is a game where I don't think any of our sort of thoughts on the tactics and styles of play and all that change from the first leg. I think it's just both teams have now had a chance to play each other once and sort of have learned about each other a bit. And I feel like that's really the only difference, because I wonder if you agree or disagree. I don't think Klopp or Nagelsmann are going to fundamentally change a lot to how they play. Both men will sort of stick to their guns, and it's sort of a game that I guess the only thing they've really gained is the knowledge of having played each other a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, definitely. Klopp and Nagelsmann are managers who approach things with a certain game plan in mind, and they're not ones to kind of move away from that. I think kind of just to sum up on Liverpool, I was just kind of looking over some of the numbers. In 2020 in the Premier League this year, they averaged 2.2 goals per game. Goals scored. In 2020, they averaged 0.8 goals against per game. This season, they're averaging 1.7 goals for and 1.3 goals against. So that's a 0.5 goal per game at each end. So effectively, they're losing 1 goal a game kind of on the scoreline. And that just makes such a huge difference to a team competing at the level that Liverpool were. And ultimately, I think kind of it's recoverable in the long run. And I think the Champions League, kind of to bring it back to that, is the final opportunity for them. Because if they can carry some kind of steam into the next round, maybe get a slightly easier draw, if possible. Of course, it's difficult to do so in the last day of the Champions League. But I do think, as kind of Anton said, this is last chance saloon for Liverpool now. If they can turn it around in the Champions League, maybe you can carry some of that form through into the Premier League as well. But yeah, I think this game in Budapest is going to be huge for Liverpool. They just need to hold on. Is it unconceivable that Leipzig could turn around a two-goal margin at this stage? Absolutely not. Of course, they could do it. I don't think they will. I think Liverpool should just about see this through.
Yes. Sorry, I was looking at the stat, and there was a stat that came out earlier this week about big chances allowed, and I think Liverpool are very high on that metric. But the one I did find was that they have, I think, the third longest barren scoring spell at home. I think they failed to score with 99 shots at home at the moment, and obviously still continuing. And I think only 2 teams in Premier League history have got a higher counting rates than that so far. So really interesting to see what happens. Let's talk about the team that they played against on Thursday that sort of dealt them their latest blow, and that's Chelsea. It was interesting because, I'll start with Anton with this. I think it was Jamie Carragher said that this sort of Chelsea team has now become the second best team in the country at the moment, in a matter of weeks, maybe a few months that Tuchel's had them in charge. I'm assuming you watched the game on Thursday. Did you learn anything new about this Chelsea team? Was there anything that particularly impressed you with their performance at Anfield on Thursday night?
Well, I thought they were solidly. It was amazing how solid. Defensively, it was amazing how solid they were. I was not expecting. I didn't know very much of Tuchel previously, but I thought he was going to be a much more attacking-minded player. Yes, Chelsea went and attacked Liverpool in the first half, but in the second half, they did sit back and they were very capable of winding Liverpool down all the way through the last 45 minutes. I was surprised about how strong they were there and how capable they looked on the run forward. Timo Werner, of course, was cancelled out his goal, but I thought he played pretty well for the first half. And yeah, I was actually surprised about Chelsea on Wednesday with that defensive strength that they showed, and I'm excited to see where they go forward, despite the fact that I'm a Liverpool fan.
Yeah, and obviously another clean sheet for them on Thursday. And I think they've now conceded just 2 goals in the last 10 games, which is remarkable, really. It was interesting, Ben, because obviously the reaction, and we covered this, obviously, the reaction to Frank Lampard losing his job was understandably born out of emotion, I guess, for what Lampard's done for Chelsea as a player. Do you feel like, looking back now, I guess, because there was a lot of takes flying out that, was this the right decision? What have they done? Do you feel now hindsight shows that they were sort of justified in making that decision, and that obviously, they weren't getting just any other manager, they were getting one of the top tactical managers at the moment in the world?
I think so, yeah. And I think the thing is as well, like, Chelsea and Tuchel himself didn't expect, this sort of opportunity to be available. So they thought we need to act on it before he gets snapped up by someone else. So I think, it completely was the right decision to do. And I think clearly Lampard did sort of kind of cloud the judgment of Chelsea's squad and perhaps transfer business. We weren't really able to see kind of how good they were as a squad, how good some of these players are, because I think maybe, Frank didn't settle them in as well, or wasn't doing or coping that well with the current Chelsea job. So I think, yeah, to that extent, I think, yeah, Lampard did probably cloud the judgment of these players a little bit, because they've really kicked on. And the thing is that I'd say, obviously, is that there's always a honeymoon period when a new manager comes in, but this is starting to not look like a honeymoon period. Normally a honeymoon period is when your attacking players just feel a bit of freedom again and kind of go out there and grab a few goals when you're just implementing your ideas. We even saw it when Jose Mourinho came into Tottenham. So I think, to that extent, yeah, it maybe is a honeymoon period, but then again, I think their defensive solidity, it's baffling to see, sometimes the mistakes and how poor they were under Frank Lampard defensively, and how solid they look now. They really don't look really look difficult to score against. And the thing is with Chelsea as well, the way they recruited, they always have options. They're always going to have options. They're always going to have a lot of squad depth. And I actually agree with Jamie Carragher saying I do think that is probably the second best squad in the country. Because, you know, I think maybe if Liverpool have all their players fit, they probably have the best 11. But Chelsea's depth is absolutely insane. And, you know, you see now switching to this kind of 5 at the back formation. And, you know, they've sort of just kind of put Marcus Alonso in. He did well for a couple of weeks. Put Chilwell in. Chilwell's done fantastic in the past couple of games. So they can start Hudson-Odoi on the right, or Reece James, or, you know, Azpilicueta could play out there, or he plays as centre-back. So the depth they've got and the ability to sort of move players around at his disposal, and he can sort of find who his best team is and bleed other players into the team and all sorts like that. It's really been tremendous. I mean, Timo Werner kind of establishing some form has been great. Obviously, his goal was ruled out, which was, you know, from a neutral perspective, a bit gutting because you kind of want to see him get on a run, but still his all-round plays improved massively. So I think Tuchel's done a fantastic job there so far, and I think Chelsea look really good. I think Chelsea will get top 4. I'm pretty certain on that, and I can go out there and say that. I think, you know, they look ahead of Liverpool and they look ahead of other teams at the moment. Certainly Manchester United as well, they look better than. So I think Chelsea should get top 4, and I think they're doing really well, and just probably more of the same with this kind of defensive solidity, because that seems to be the foundation for their success at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, Luke, it's interesting what Ben says, because now when you watch this Chelsea side play, there's sort of this, you feel that they have a plan B, plan C, and that's obviously not just down to the options they have on the bench, but the way they're utilized, I guess, and how effectively they're utilized. And yeah, it just, I mean, they are, as the table suggests, they are now in 4th place, but you feel like the ceiling for this team's now a lot higher. And yeah, I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on what Carragher said. Do you feel like they are the second best team in the country at the moment?
Yes, I do. And the main reason for this is because they probably should have been in the first place, definitely in the conversation for being one of the best teams in the country anyway. And I just think ultimately the difference between what we're seeing now under Thomas Tuchel and what we previously saw under Frank Lampard is that Chelsea have a really resilient, well thought out plan. And I think under Frank Lampard, there was kind of a sketch of a system and an idea of how they wanted to play, but it was never executed properly. I think under Tuchel, the difference is they have a very, very clear, well-drilled strategy. And with the players in the team that Chelsea have, even without the likes of Timo Werner and Kai Havertz firing, it's still obviously going to be enough to kind of bring them up the table. And I think it's important to remember as a whole, when we're talking about anyone in the kind of conversation for the top 8 this year, is that this Premier League season is of a lower quality than previous. You don't have to be as good this year to finish in the higher places, kind of in the standings, and I think West Ham is a perfect illustration of that, to be completely honest. So Chelsea don't have to be excellent to be the second best team in England this year. They just have to be quite good. And I think if you look at the way they're playing at the minute, they're so defensively solid. And the main difference simply is that this strategy that they've implemented under Tuchel is all about controlling the tempo of the game. When they have the ball, they look really comfortable. Even someone like kind of Kante, who isn't particularly well known for kind of being this player you want to have in possession, has looked really comfortable at the minute. And I think the reason why the players look so comfortable in possession is just because they know that they have a framework around them that allows them to get out of trouble. Like, they've got players to the left, they've got players to the right, they've got 3 at the back. And I just think for Chelsea, I think it's somewhat playing it safe. I don't think it's particularly expansive, and I don't find it that entertaining. Will they finish kind of as the second form team in the country? I think so. I think they're playing really, really well, and I think it's a testament to how good a manager Tuchel is. Whether or not he can keep it up remains to be seen. But for now, yeah, I'm impressed by Chelsea at the minute.
Yeah, and there is a player, and obviously he has, as Ben said, he has sort of brought out performances out of the likes of Marcus Alonso, who was, as I said last week, he was sort of persona non grata with this Chelsea side, and just it seemed like he was ready to be sold, I guess, in the summer, but obviously he has now got a potential spot in this first team for a while. And we talked about, obviously, Timo Werner, he's elevated performance, but the difference maker on Thursday was Mason Mount. And just a quick stat from Opta, he scored 3 goals in the last 8 league games under Tuchel, compared to 2 in 18 under Lampard. And while I'm not I mean, obviously, Anton, Lampard did a lot to mold Mount and sort of make him into the player he is now. And now that he's sort of with Tuchel and seemingly got sort of gone a bit higher as well as what he was doing under Lampard, he is someone who, sure, I mean, one, he will probably make the England squad and should make the England squad in the summer, but also is kind of sort of making a case for him to be in the starting 11 for the national team as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's that's going to be one of the key questions in the summer, is how do you fit all that attacking talent England have at the moment to go together in the starting 11? I don't think you can, but I think Mason Mount is starting to make the case for himself. I think he had a slightly, perhaps a quieter start to the season than he did last season, but he's certainly building back into the team again. When watching on, was it Thursday night, it was amazing to see how free he looked. I didn't previously see him as a key figure for the Chelsea side, but the goal showed it, but he was that sort of, he felt like the key, he felt like the person who was going to be the game winner for Chelsea. And absolutely, I think he's making the case to go into the national side. I don't see why not. I have to look around Chelsea's other players. I think that part of it, I think that Chelsea have something that Liverpool don't as well. It's this competition element. Chelsea have plenty of attackers that can play at the moment. Giroud's on fire. Tammy Abraham can probably provide goals. Werner's not playing the best, but still the players have to fight to keep their place in the squad. And I think that's bringing the best out of Mason Mount. As I mentioned before, I think absolutely he's making that case to start. Certainly to be part of the England squad, probably even to start. I think he's one of the key players, or he could be one of the key players for England this summer.
Yeah, and Ben, just how impressed. I mean, I guess he has been sort of that number one consistent player for Chelsea this whole season, and there's a case to be made that he's probably been their best player this season. How impressed have you been by him, and just how, he just continues to sort of, he's gone from that sort of steady 7 out of 10 player to now someone who's capable of being a match winner on his day.
Yeah, no, I've been really impressed with him. I think he's massively improved his game. And I think one of his best advantages is he can almost play kind of like a deep central role. He can play an attacking midfielder role. We've seen him play on the right, we've seen him play on the left. So he can play a lot of roles, and that certainly impacts whether he'll get into this England squad, which is probably a definite yes now because of the amount of roles he can cover. And that's such a blessing for this England team. I think as well as that, England have a lot of sort of players, kind of CDMs who like to play in front of them. You think of sort of maybe Declan Rice or Calvin Phillips, that kind of screen for a back four. However, Mason Mount maybe can play more of an 8, take the ball on a half turn and turn around and create. And I think that's better than playing 2 players like that. So I think it's definitely a plus for the England squad. I definitely think he should be starting, and we'll see in the next international break, maybe if he gets some games starting, and what he can do there. And that will be very exciting. But yeah, I think the thing is, when Tuchel came in, I think it was almost like I think he benched him in his first game, and I think that was because he clearly had a very close relationship with Frank Lampard, and to some extent I did think maybe there is a little bit of favouritism in there because of how close he is with Frank Lampard, and how good is Mason Mount was really the question I was sort of asking. But I think Tuchel can't leave him out at the moment because of his form and how well he's playing, and I think that's the case. Everyone sort of surrounding Mason Mount's come out and said he's a manager's dream to have, with the effort he puts in, the desire to learn and everything, and that's always going to end up being a great player if you have an attitude like that. So I think he's doing really good. I think he has he's a little bit different to some players. I think previously I maybe judged him thinking, I was like, Mason Mount's a decent player, but no more than that. Whereas I think right now he's sort of elevated his ceiling. He really could go really far in this game. And I think, he's got a lot of qualities that, just like I said before, allow him to play plenty of positions and play them really well. So he's an absolute asset for that Chelsea team and also for the England squad.
Yeah, it does sort of look that way. And looking ahead to Monday's fixture, just had to check there, against Everton, Luke. I think the big strength for Mount is that he's able to play in both a possession-based game and a counter-attacking based game. I think that his versatility helps there. And speaking of those sort of tactics, we know Carlo Ancelotti's team are one that sort of likes to play with control. They like to play with the ball with like Alan and Doucouré on the ball and sort of maintain possession and sort of control the game from there. Do we expect a more counter-attacking sort of perspective from Chelsea on Monday night with the likes of Timo Werner, running at Yerry Mina and Michael Keane with pace? Is that sort of the format? Because both managers are sort of very flexible and adaptable. It's going to be a really interesting tactical matchup for Tuchel versus Ancelotti.
To be honest, I think Chelsea will keep keep things as they have been going, because they've been playing really well. I think we'll see a similar setup to what we saw against Liverpool last week. Briefly on Mason Mount, I think it's really harsh the way that people kind of have been talking about him, because this is a player who had a really good youth career with England, and kind of as an 18-year-old playing in the Dutch top flight, he made 22 starts and scored 9 goals. So I think the English press kind of hugely overblown kind of the relationship between him and Lampard. He wasn't just kind of Lampard's kind of wonder child. He was genuinely a very good footballer before Frank Lampard, and he will continue to be afterwards. On the Everton game, I think Chelsea just need to continue as they are. I think they must set up again, of course, with the 3 at the back. I think Hudson-Odoi should play. I think Mason Mount should play. Honestly, I don't think there's much that you want to change about this Chelsea team at the minute. I'd probably start Timo Werner because I think Everton can be a little bit vulnerable to kind of pacing behind. And I think that gives Chelsea something a little bit different. But yeah, basically, I think you shouldn't massively change a winning formula. And at the minute, Thomas Tuchel has a winning formula with Chelsea, and they look really good. So yeah, I think more of the same from Chelsea this week.
Yeah, it looks like a really fascinating game. Yeah, I guess before we move on, does anyone have any predictions on how that game's going to go? Because obviously Everton, we know obviously Richarlison is arguably the in-form forward at the moment, and we know how lethal Dominic Calvert-Lewin can be. Does anyone want to go out on a limb and make a prediction for Monday night? I'll ease it and I'll say I think it's going to be... I could see a 1-1 draw, but I think I'll give it to 2-1 Chelsea, just on the back of their form and just on their defensive stability. I think obviously Rudiger's played a lot better recently. And I think he's got the sort of characteristics to stifle Calvert-Lewin, although Calvert-Lewin is one of those players that just finds a way to score. So I might be eating my words there, but that's sort of where I lie with 2-1. Ben, do you have any thoughts, a prediction or something of that sort?
Yeah, I think I can only see Everton getting sort of max 1 goal. So I'd either go for kind of a 2-1 Chelsea or 1-0 Chelsea. I think they're so solid. It's going to be difficult for them to penetrate. So yeah, I think probably I'll go with, to make it different, I'll go with 1-0 Chelsea.
Okay. Anton, any thoughts on the potential scoreline in that game?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a draw. It's going to, or either a close win or a draw between the two of them. I think Chelsea looks so strong at the back, like we've mentioned over the previous conversation. And I see it difficult for Everton to break them down. Perhaps Chelsea going forward can provide a threat as well. So as I say, either it could be a 0-0 stalemate, it could be a 1-0 stalemate, but it's going to be close nevertheless.
Yeah, and Luke, it's 4th versus 5th. Obviously, they're separated by a point, but also we've seen big games between sort of the so-called bigger sides have sort of petered out into stalemates. So there's obviously that caution to throw at. But what do you reckon?
I think 1-1. I mean, Chelsea over the past 5 games have 11 points, Everton 9 points. I think, honestly, this is probably going to be a draw. Chelsea look good, Everton look good. I think Richarlison will probably score because he's just been in such brilliant form. And these are both 2 teams that are having really good seasons. When I say really good seasons, I mean since Tuchel came in as well. So yeah, I think this is probably a draw, but it wouldn't surprise me if Chelsea got the win. I think they're definitely the favourites.
Fair enough. Well, let's move to their North London rivals. So I guess the third team's, sort of the final sort of team that sort of captured sort of the headlines on this weekend, and that's Tottenham Hotspur, who we saw last stream talked about how they've sort of showed signs of, I don't know, just fragility maybe at the back. They didn't look like going forward. They had sort of a bit like Liverpool, really. They didn't really have that spark going forward, but now, Ben, we have Gareth Bale's back, and it's a bit like having it's sort of like bringing back a superhero, and now it's sort of frightening to see him, Kane, and Son as a front 3, and Dele Alli in behind.
Yeah, I think it's exciting for any Premier League fan to see Gareth Bale establish some form again. And the thing is with Gareth Bale as well, he's never going to be the same player that he was that left. You know, he's spent a lot of years not really playing games, and you know what happened at the end of Madrid definitely would have knocked his confidence. And I've heard a lot of previous managers say he is definitely a confidence player. That being said, the fact that he's got 2 goals and the fact that he is a confidence player looks really good and exciting for the future for Gareth Bale. Spurs need a push. They need to pick up, and I think Bale and probably Ali as well and his good performance can probably provide that for them. So I think, Spurs, they're still going to probably target the Europa League. I think the league, then maybe a top 4 spot, it's too far gone there. They're not consistent enough. But Jose Mourinho, and whatever you say about them, he really does know how to win the Europa League. And I remember him doing it with Manchester United. And obviously I watched pretty much every game. Never once did I think we weren't going to win the Europa League. I thought that he was in complete control of that competition. Even when I think we needed a last minute goal, I still thought that we probably would end up doing it. So I think, it looks likely that Spurs are contenders for the Europa League, but still there's always just that mental block. And I spoke about it last week with Manchester City in the Champions League, and it's the same with Spurs and a trophy. Was always this catchphrase of they're going to go Spursy and they're going to do it, but the problem is they've done it so many times that it genuinely could happen. So I think they've got to be careful of that. But Spurs, it's really, really encouraging for them to get Gareth Bale firing, because it probably looked like one of the worst signings of the season, albeit on loan, so far up until now. So great that Jose Mourinho has managed to get that out of him. Although Jose Mourinho's style, I've been confused about this for years over really how to kind of box his style. And then I think I heard someone say that it's a style that relies on player instinct. And I thought then that's just kind of a bit kind of hypocrisy with his character, because obviously he's a manager who likes to get a reaction out of his players, likes to maybe rub them up the wrong way, and to try and motivate them or something. But really, if you're kind of relying on player instincts, then you need your players to have confidence, and you can't keep knocking that confidence in training. So that there's the debate about whether his style is kind of outdated or not anymore. That's a different debate, but definitely encouraging for Spurs fans and probably neutrals as well, because I think we all really want to see Gareth Bale do well.
Yeah, and just quickly on the style thing, I think it's interesting because we obviously, we know about his demands for wingers to track back and all that. So I feel like he does have structure defensively, but going forward, I would sort of agree with whoever made that point. It is sort of instincts, I guess, maybe putting players in the right positions to sort of do what they do, to put it simply. Here's the question I've just put up regarding Gareth Bale. Anton, we saw when that move first got announced that he was coming back to Spurs, there was obviously a lot of excitement from Spurs fans, given his past history for the club. And then there was this period where you were sort of like, where is he? What is he doing? Because he was on the bench. He wasn't really being picked, and then sort of there were question marks over should this deal have been done in the first place? But now we're sort of seeing what a fully fit Gareth Bale can do for the Spurs team. Obviously, there's still fitness concerns on whether he can play, multiple games in a row. But are we sort of starting to be convinced that this is the Gareth Bale of old, and that he can sort of lift Spurs from this sort of mediocre form that they've had recently into making maybe a late push for top 4 as well?
Well, I think Ben was absolutely right when he said that. We probably won't see the real Gareth Bale of old again. But I think it is very exciting from a neutral point of view as well to see Gareth Bale sort of get back involved in that team. I think when you talk about a threat that he can pose, I don't think individually he is a threat, but I think as part of that combination of a front 3 and perhaps even a front 4 with Dele Alli or Lucas Moura sitting in behind Harry Kane, I think that is definitely frightening. I think perhaps he's more potent in the Europa League. I think, as Ben mentioned as well, the Champions League looks like a objective that's too far gone now for Spurs. If we're looking at Liverpool, yes, they're in bad form to get back in, but I think Spurs are even further behind them. So for them to get back into that competition for the top 4 is difficult. But I think in the Europa League, Spurs definitely have a chance to go through. Mourinho, as we mentioned, has that experience going there. And I think Gareth Bale being part of that front 4, both individually and part of the group, can pose a big threat and can certainly cause Tottenham's season to go for a much better turn here. But yeah, absolutely very exciting to see Gareth Bale scoring again. And promising signs both in the game against Fulham, but also in their game against Burnley.
Yeah, and Luke, it's good news, I guess, not only for Spurs, but for the Premier League as well. I guess having someone who obviously, chose to pave his way and leave the Premier League because he thought the next step was La Liga. Obviously, it worked to a certain extent. He's obviously achieved a lot of success there and produced some stunning performances, but it's obviously, we talk about Ben and Anton have touched on it. The neutrals would be excited with this move. It's just great news all around that this guy is back. If not at his best, obviously back to the best form of what he can be at the moment. And Tottenham, we thought their season was starting to sputter out, but he might have just kicked them back into life, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, kind of touching on what Ben and Anton said, it's not a surprise that Gareth Bale is a different player, because players change as they get older, and Bale is someone who has kind of aged quicker than most because of his injury record. So, of course, it is going to be a different type of player playing under a different type of manager to kind of what he previously has experienced, especially at Tottenham. I think Tottenham had a really big summer as well, didn't they? Because on both sides of the game, they had Alex Morgan join and Gareth Bale join at a similar time. And it was looking like a really exciting time for them. Morgan's time in the WSL kind of spluttered out and was ended prematurely. Gareth Bale kind of had a second chance after Christmas and has started to come good. And I just think ultimately the dividing line between Gareth Bale being a success and a failure at Tottenham this time out was he just had to get his confidence back. You just had to put him on the pitch and he would score goals because he's just got that quality. And I think, kind of talking about kind of the team as a whole, I think it's interesting now that kind of Dele Alli is starting to kind of reappear into the fold under Jose Mourinho, because again, that gives them a different angle too. And I think Tottenham are only 5 points off the Champions League places, and that's remarkable in itself, because we've been talking for weeks and weeks and weeks about how bad Tottenham are, how they're so far out of the race, how the season is over, and how Mourinho is potentially finished. And yet in this season, when kind of the benchmark is lowered, they're still in with a shot of qualifying for the Champions League next year. And I think they've got a really good chance in the Europa League in particular. And I say that because they've just got players that desperately want to win a trophy. And I think, of course, it's not the big one. It's not the one that Harry Kane wants to win. But if Gareth Bale can come back, help guide Tottenham to Europa League final, I honestly think there are very, very few teams who they wouldn't be able to get past in that situation, because they've got the players and they've got a manager who, for all of his faults, kind of knows how to win. And I do honestly think that Gareth Bale is a winner. And I think, kind of from a neutral perspective, then yeah, it could end really, really well for Tottenham and Gareth Bale.
Yeah, and to touch upon the summer they had, obviously Gareth Bale, we could now say, I guess, is a success of a signing. Obviously, it's taken a while to say that, but I feel like we sort of land on that side of the coin now. Obviously, Sergio Reguilon, that was the move I was more excited about more than Bale. And obviously, he's had to rotate the position with Ben Davies a lot, but I think that one will be a success. Obviously, the buyback clause is going to be interesting to see if Real Madrid ever sort of ignite that. But given that they've got Marcelo and Ferland Mendy at that spot, I don't think they're in a rush to sort of bring back Reguilon anytime soon. On the flip side, obviously, Matt Doherty's not quite worked out, I guess. Obviously, performed really well at Wolves. I don't think that move's quite panned out as planned. And you mentioned Alex Morgan, obviously great on the commercial side, great on the PR side for the women's side, but on the pitch hasn't quite translated into success. I don't know if their goal was to challenge Man City, Arsenal, Chelsea women, but it hasn't really panned out that way, I suppose. But Ben, just thinking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you think Spurs' best sort of midfield attack combination is different, but sort of in my mind, it's Højbjerg at the base, and then you have Ndombele and Dele Alli sort of alongside him, and then Bale, Son, and Kane, in that front three. That's a six that rivals, that could arguably have a case for being one of the best in the Premier League, if not the best. It sort of rivals a lot of teams' midfield forward combinations at the moment.
I think so. Yeah, definitely on paper, that's their strongest team. And, I'd go even further to say that, I think we talked before when Tottenham were playing, before they played Manchester City and before they got the win very early on in the season, I think they brought Sissoko in as well, and had like Sissoko playing alongside Ndombele, and that works really well because that's a very athletic midfield. So they've got other options as well. We talked about Lucas Moura, Bergwijn when he's fit can come in there. So I think, yeah, definitely that's their best, but they actually have a few options on the bench as well. So like you're saying, that does rival other teams in the league. Of course, I think that on paper they should definitely be in the top four with that team. I think it's they're having a disappointing season. They've been on a bad run, but the actual players that they've got there at the club are some really, really good players. Even we talked about sort of Lucas Moura and Bergwijn, who probably don't get into that best front three there. They're fantastic players. Lucas Moura at PSG was fantastic, and when he came to Spurs as well, he's always been a very consistent performer. And Bergwijn, he was amazing in the Dutch league, and he, maybe hasn't quite kicked off for him as much, but still he's got a certain level of physicality about him that will, never let his performance kind of seep below par. So I think Tottenham definitely have options, and they're definitely, aren't probably performing to the standard of their squad. But it's encouraging now if they're starting to get confidence, if they can start to get some rhythm together. I think, Dele Alli is key in there. Of course, Bale's kind of taken the headlines, but Dele Alli is a creative force. I think he's been brilliant. His movement off the ball, and when he's on the ball, his vision as well. He's been fantastic for years. So I think it's really important that they, Jose Mourinho and Dele Alli sorted out their relationship like they publicly said they did, and now can start to see Dele Alli perform well, because as well, Dele Alli is someone who not previously be in contention obviously for the England squad. Is he going to be this time? I'd say probably his position's a bit too crowded and maybe secured by other people, but I still think just from a neutral perspective, again, you want to be seeing a young English talent do well. So I think Tottenham, they definitely have a lot of options, and definitely going forward on paper, I think they are one of the strongest teams in the league. So it's just whether they can sort of, I don't know, keep their head down, listen to their coach about the Europa League, because I think that's the make or break of their season. And I think even if they got second place, it's a poor season for Spurs, they have to win the Europa League for me.
Yeah, and I just remembered there is one move I did forget, and that was Joe Hart obviously made the move to Spurs, and it does provide competition, I guess, for Hugo Lloris, who's sort of been up and down of late. So I guess that was sort of a positive move. Anton, I just want to put you in a scenario here. If you're Daniel Levy, and obviously Bale's a loan, and you have the option to make that permanent, first of all, would you bring back Bale permanently? And obviously you have to take on those wages per se. Let's just say they're as high as they are now. And second of all, would you entertain selling Dele Alli now, or do you feel like there is sort of a place for him in the future for Spurs, and reject any offer from PSG or whichever suitor kind of comes after him?
I think the key thing for Spurs is to develop some consistency. Gareth Bale, if he produces now in the next 10 games, it might well be worth keeping him in the team. I think actually the make or break in that situation is how Spurs finish the season. It's been sort of up and down, as we mentioned before, all season long. But I think if they can get that front six going really well towards the end here and rack up some points and gain a good position in the Europa League, whether they win it or at least get to the final, that doesn't matter to me so much, I don't think. But I think if they can really develop that six and really have a strong finish to the season, I don't see any reason why Daniel Levy wouldn't think about taking on Gareth Bale in the future. I think Dele Alli, with regard to him, I think if you can get him mixed in again, we've seen how good he is. Obviously, he had that riff with Mourinho, and he was slightly lacking towards the end of Pochettino's reign at Spurs. But I think if you can get Dele Alli working again as part of that six, I don't see why you would sell him at the moment. I think as well, we mentioned sizable price tags being unfeasible this summer. I don't think that Dele Alli is going to go cheaply, even if he finishes the season in terrible form suddenly. So I think it's important for Spurs to keep that front six together, and ideally, if they can keep Dele Alli and Gareth Bale, I don't see why they wouldn't. Particularly, as I say, if they have a good finish to the season and if they get that trophy in the bag, I don't see why not keep him.
Yeah, and of course, I sort of want to end the Spurs conversation, Luke, with for all the positivity around Spurs, and it feels like there has been an injection of it, certainly in the last week or so. You sort of feel like their window to win trophies sort of hinges on Harry Kane and whether he's willing to stick with the Spurs team long term, or believe me, I'm not in favor of moving players to bigger teams and sort of creating sort of a super team. That's not what I'm in favor of, because obviously we want plurality in this competition, but it does sort of hinge on what he wants his legacy to be, and if he wants to sort of win stuff, because it's with Spurs, it's always a bit of a question mark on what are their long-term prospects, and it's sort of I guess it does feel like it hinges on his willingness to sort of commit and stay at Spurs.
Yeah, with Harry Kane, I think it just depends on what he wants and if there are any suitors for him. I think the biggest issue for Harry Kane is that I find it really hard to imagine him playing anywhere but the Premier League. I just think his I just think he's kind of inclined to stay in England. I think if you look at that and you say, okay, where could he move to? There aren't many places that could afford to give Tottenham the money that they'd want to sell to a Premier League rival. And I think, kind of thinking of West Ham's dealings with Tottenham in the past, this is a club that is very, very hard negotiators and always gets the best possible price. So I think Harry Kane is pretty much staying put for the time being. And yeah, I do agree. I think they're very much in win now mode, Tottenham. They have to win something with Harry Kane soon. Otherwise, I think the time period will pass, because he is just such a good player and he can score goals and play in so many different ways. I think the only caveat I would put to that is I honestly do believe that if Kane were to sustain more injuries and had to drop a little bit deeper, I think that would give Tottenham something a little bit different too. So I think even if we stretch this further into the future, Harry Kane is still at Tottenham and he's playing in a deeper position. Perhaps he can still offer them something different because his interplay with his teammates is so good. So perhaps Tottenham don't have to win with Harry Kane as the striker, but as you say, the window is definitely closing for them.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to, I'm sure this conversation, I don't think this is going to go away regarding Harry Kane's future. I feel like this is a conversation that's going to be around for a while, so I don't want to push it now because obviously there's still a fair bit of season to go. But it's an interesting one, I guess, just given he is sort of, I guess, or their sort of prospects are sort of tied to what he wants to do. And so we'll wait and see what happens. I did want to, before we talk about sort of run through the rest of sort of the major stories of the league, I did want to say, and by the way, I know they are playing Palace and Dynamo Zagreb over the course of this week. They should be able to get through both games. Therefore, I'm not really asking you guys about it because I feel like we expect, Gareth Bale to tear Patrick Van Aanholt a new one. And likewise for where you have a poor Zagreb fullback has to kind of go up against them. But there was an interesting point on Twitter over the last week about how sort of the more games we get, the more the quality of football seems to be sort of dipping as a result. And obviously that is, scientifically and logically makes sense because fatigue and obviously, players are playing twice a week, maybe even 3 times with those teams in European competitions. But does that worry anyone? Ben, does that worry you that, obviously there's a rush to get all these games in, and because of a pandemic affected season, teams want closure to finish the season. But does that worry you that sort of games are sort of petering out? The midweek games, Fulham, you mentioned Spurs beat Fulham 1-0. Liverpool, Chelsea was decided by 1 goal. At West Brom, Everton was decided by 1 goal. I could go on. It does feel like it might, just tiredness might be getting to the Premier League at the moment.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think there's definitely been like almost a dip in quality because of that. And it is an issue because as well, I think I spoke about fixture congestion before in the first term. And I was just saying how, I just haven't heard of any players who are consulted. That I haven't heard of a player speak out about it. And ultimately, it almost seems as if, okay, before that, it's broadcasting rights. It's whether we can finish it in time for the Euros. It's all of this other stuff is considered. And actually, sort of players' mental and physical well-being is consulted last, really. That's what it feels like. And I definitely think we're seeing an issue. It's almost like I think kind of clubs are having to pretty much, everyone says that cliche, we take 1 game at a time. There is absolutely no way the top teams or any teams can take 1 game at a time at the moment. They're having to plan and rotate, or they're just not rotating, and it's leaving players feel really tired and then be more susceptible to injuries. So it's a massive problem that's going to continue as it looks. And I just think, obviously we are seeing a dip in quality, and it's baffling to think that we've seen this dip in quality in the Europa League, has pretty much only just started again. The worst of the Europa League fixture congestion is yet to come, which is a scary thought, I think, for the clubs that are involved in that, as I know Manchester United are. So yeah, definitely. From watching Manchester United, I know that I can see players on that pitch who look exhausted, and everyone talks about, the physical kind of fatigue. But I think as well, mental fatigue is so important to actually kind of prepare yourself. And it's not like mental and physical. They're not separate things. They are one. They're together. They come hand in hand. And there's so many examples of that in so many different other aspects of life. And I think that's something that needs to be considered as well, because I think there's, whilst you have all these kind of physiotherapists and people who are aware of this physical kind of fatigue and have ways of doing that, I'm not convinced that in the Premier League and in football, and probably in society as a whole, getting a bit political here though, that there's just not enough kind of mental support there for these footballers in particular, because the mental fatigue of these games, having to moat yourself game after game, having to feel the pressure game after game in such a kind of quick, unprecedented circumstances without any fans as well, it's asking a lot. It's asking an awful lot. And yes, you can bring in the wage, but to be honest, that's just irrelevant when you're talking about well-being. So I think to that extent, I am worried and I am fearful for some of these players, and I hope that there's some kind of gets sorted or something, because like I said, I'm not actually hearing any players kind of speak out on their mental and physical well-being, and to me that's my biggest worry.
Yeah, and I sort of raised that point because we talked about the three teams with sort of the biggest stories, but in itself that was the whole sort of the attrition of the league is sort of becoming a bit of a story in itself. And to highlight that point, we're recording this on a Saturday afternoon. Burnley and Arsenal, that game's finished about 20 minutes ago. That was 1-1, which, great. It wasn't exactly, I wasn't expecting an entertaining game by all accounts, but certainly it just, highlights that point, I guess. And Anton, the biggest danger, and obviously, the biggest danger is that we get to the Euros and then teams are just wiped off their feet, I guess, and we just sort of get these really close, tight games. And I know, obviously, there's a lot of excitement in this country about potential of England taking the Euros this summer and hosting all the games. And granted, I will see what happens. I imagine there's a lot of European cities who will want to dispute that because obviously they'd want to keep the games to themselves as well. So we'll see what happens there. But would it spoil it for you, I guess, if we get to the Euros and we're sort of treated to sort of goalless draws, 1-0 games? Does that worry you at all?
I think, first of all, I think Ben was absolutely right. I think that the financial aspect of football, just to tap on that, has taken over completely. The mental aspect hasn't been covered at all in my eyes. But I think when you look at the Euros, I think the Euros will show a sort of a result of this packed season. Players are inevitably going to be absolutely exhausted. It's games every 2-3 days at the moment, and I think it would be a huge disappointment for the tournament this year if it's just 0-0, 1-0, basic, almost goalless games. I think inevitably when you get to the Euros, the quality is higher, and particularly in the latter stages, the goals start to decrease. You get the better defenses and tighter games. That's inevitable. But I think it'd be a disappointment in the earlier stages if particularly the top countries couldn't produce the best football that they can because the season has been so packed as it has been this year. But I do think it is potentially dangerous for a country like England or a team like England, where we're finally seeing some real potential, I think a real chance for England this year, maybe not to win it, but to go far in the tournament. I think it's a danger that the season has been so tightly packed and perhaps could lead to a very disappointing Euros.
Yeah, and to put a bow on this conversation, Luke, I know that granted, all leagues are playing, all European leagues are sort of playing. So England are not, it's not a problem just confined to them, but it does feel like that because obviously the Bundesliga took their winter break as normal. La Liga had a bit of time off, and English clubs tend to get, I think now they tend to get a week off or 2 weeks off, but then the FA Cup sort of games sort of flood into that weekend, and so it doesn't really it doesn't end up being a break in reality. But what do you think? Because obviously there's the Copa America, I think, happening this summer as well, which is not ideal considering the large South American contingent that play in the Premier League as well. And obviously, this isn't a Premier League issue. Obviously, Championship, League One, League Two, you can look all the way down the pyramid, the English football pyramid. What do you think? Because there's no easy way to fix this, but it does feel like this is sort of a byproduct of the scheduling, and it may have a knock-on effect for the following season. Teams may get off to pretty slow starts, and who knows, what's going to happen next. And then obviously you have the World Cup in 2022, which is not far away either. So it's an interesting issue that I guess there's no real easy way to fix, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. The fixture list is a mess, and it's going to continue to be a mess until the World Cup at the very earliest, because we have a situation now where we're struggling to fit the matches in between now and the end of the season, of course, and that's partly exacerbated by the fact that we've got the European Championships this summer. So then we'll have that season. We'll go into kind of 2021, 2022. That will be a relatively normal season by comparison to what we've just seen. 2022, 2023 has the World Cup plonked right in the middle of it. So for players who are going to be playing at kind of this year's European Championships and obviously the other continental competitions around the world, that's a huge issue. And then you have a normal season, which of course will be slightly squished together because of the pandemic as well. And then you go into a year with a World Cup in the middle of it. It's just, as Ben said, and kind of Anton as well, it's just money is dictating this. And at certain points, I mean, I don't think that's always a bad thing. Someone made this point about the European Championships, when kind of the criticism is, well, they're only being played this year because they need the money. But it's important to remember that the European Championships, a lot of that money does go towards funding grassroots football in other organizations. So like the smaller confederations within UEFA, that's most of their income. So it's important that those games are played, because kind of looking after football in those different countries. But the fixture list in general is just a joke. I think UEFA should have held off on scheduling the Euros for when they did. I mean, I'm meant to be in Budapest on June the 27th to watch a game. It's just ridiculous. Like, they could have waited another month and pushed the season back. And I think, all in all, I think world governing bodies, kind of confederations around the world, should have just looked at the 2022 World Cup and been a little bit more creative, because we could have had a situation where for the next couple of years, leagues around the world play with a slightly adjusted schedule, and then it wouldn't be as crazy. And people could say, well, who wants to watch kind of footballers playing in the summer or whatever it might have been? But at least then kind of you still get a proper season, and then you don't have this kind of continual debate about kind of, are injuries kind of too much? Is the fixture congestion too much? I just think that we could have avoided so many of these problems by taking a little bit more of a kind of long-sighted view, rather than just kind of restart as soon as possible. So yeah, all in all, the fixture congestion is a huge problem, and it's only going to get worse kind of once they change the format of the Champions League to have kind of a 10-match group stage. So yeah, I think it's something to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? And, you know, I know in Italy, I think they had questions of whether to reduce the league to maybe 19 teams or 18 teams. And certainly, I don't know, I haven't really checked up recently on if opinions on that have changed. But certainly in the Premier League, I don't think you're going to see that, because obviously there are a lot of championship clubs who will understandably want their shot in the big time, the Premier League, and with the money that it brings. And so reducing teams there is not going to be, it's going to be a non-starter. And yeah, it does feel like, I know we're all football fans sitting here, but it does feel like there's sort of football fatigue, certainly from my perspective. So again, kind of get up and then see this game and see these players sort of collapse on their feet within 60, 70 minutes. And it does feel like, you know, it does feel like some of the fun and joy has been sort of stripped away a little bit, which like you guys have said, it's a complicated issue, and obviously broadcasters will want to, you know, continue getting returns on how much they invested in the game, and yeah, there's no really easy way to fix it. So that's an issue going forward. But I just wanted to bring that up because it's sort of this week of the Premier League action, it did feel like that. I did sort of see a slowing of that of the flow of goals, certainly. Yeah, so we'll see what happens. It's an interesting thing. But to just quickly run through some of the other stuff. I mean, Ben, just your Man United checkup, really. 4 draws, obviously goalless against Chelsea, and then the other one goalless against Palace. And obviously Man City coming up on Sunday, probably the game of the weekend that we haven't discussed until like the 78th minute mark of this sort of show. But what are your thoughts on Man United at the moment? And obviously, and AC Milan as well coming up on Thursday as well in the Europa League, which is obviously a tough game. No Zlatan, but still a very formidable, fast, rising Milan team. So big week coming up on the back of some pretty mediocre performances.
Yeah, no, it's a very tough time for Manchester United, and if I'm honest, it's not looking good. linking well into what we just said in the last conversation, they look tired. The players look really tired. I mean, there's players like Marcus Rashford, Harry Maguire, Bruno Fernandes, Wan-Bissaka. Those are probably the players who almost played every single minute of every single game. They are running to the ground, and it's because Ole Gunnar Solskjaer doesn't really understand his doesn't really trust his other players to come in and do a job for certain games, and that's leading to these players being playing too many games really, because we're reliant on them. But it's got to the point now where they're not even producing in games because teams are nullifying those threats. So from that perspective, I mean, I really don't know. It's a bit helpless really as a Manchester United fan. My problem is that they look really two-dimensional at the moment, and I say this because if from a perspective of playing Manchester United, if you nullify Bruno Fernandes, that is the main threat gone. I also think I looked at a stat and I saw that I think Luke Shaw's created something like third most chances in Europe's top 5 leagues, and Luke Shaw has had a fantastic season. But with Luke Shaw and Marcus Rashford down that left-hand side, that is a threat. However, for football teams and opposition, that is very easy to just basically screen your back four to allow Bruno Fernandes not to get into any kind of advanced positions or space, and then also nullify that left-hand side by kind of playing your winger and your fullback deep. That's a very simple thing to do, because Manchester United's right-hand side, whoever plays in that right side of midfield is either Dan James, who's natural on the left, or Mason Greenwood, who's natural up front, and Wan-Bissaka is not the strongest going forward. So from that perspective, you're happy to let Manchester United attack down the left, and you're happy to let Fred and McTominay bomb forward, because I really don't think creatively they pose much of a threat at all either. So from that sense, I think at the moment it's quite easy to play Manchester United. They look two-dimensional. They don't look like they sort of are going to really surprise you. They look tired. They're not scoring. The defense has had problems all season. That's been the main problem, and now they're not scoring. I mean, it's just going to be, I kind of feel like a bit of nothing really with this game, because I just think that I have no idea how it's going to go, but I'm not positive. So I think, for a Manchester United fan, you've got to brace yourselves for this really difficult period now. I think Manchester City, maybe they do have the capacity to win, and that's a big statement, me saying that, but that's because of Manchester United previously. They've always surprised against Manchester City. They get almost a kind of second wind whenever they play in the Manchester derby, and I think there's been a bigger gulf in the team's qualities before, and we've won. So we could win. However, I think almost routine kind of victory for City if they do the right things and don't overcomplicate it. I'm 100% sure Man City can win that game. And again, AC Milan, we spoke a lot last week how it's a good time to play Milan. I think it's an even better time to play Manchester United, to be honest. These players are absolutely exhausted and not performing. So I think it's a brilliant time to play Manchester United, and I think AC Milan probably look more likely for that as well. So this has turned into a rant, and I'm very negative this week about it. But I honestly, after watching that Crystal Palace game, there was not a glimmer of hope in that game and any positivity to take from it. So I think it's Manchester United fans, we need to brace ourselves for this tough period, and hopefully we can get through it, because top 4 is absolutely vital if we want to improve on this season and last season.
Yeah, and just quickly, Anton, I'm just going to ask you about your perspective on Man City and United in just a sec. Obviously, while recording with Sheffield United, Southampton have kicked off, and Danny Ings has come off with an injury, which I guess highlights the whole injury prone nature of this season. I guess players are coming off because of the amount of games built into them. I guess fatigue and injuries sort of becoming more of a risk, and Danny Ings has just come off, which I don't know. Well, I don't know how severe that is going to be, but that's concerning for England, I guess, with their striker stocks heading into Euros. But anyway, Anton, just City, United. Best case scenario, I guess, is if they cancel each other out from a Liverpool perspective. But I guess, watching this game, any thoughts on how it's going to pan out or what you're looking forward to?
So I think, like you say, for me, the ideal outcome is that they cancel each other out. They each get a point, and everybody goes home happy at the end of the day. But I think City look so good at the moment. They look unstoppable. They look like a team that whatever team they put out, they're going to win the game. And as Ben very clearly mentioned, Manchester United just look like the team to play at the moment. The game against Palace wasn't particularly interesting from their side. And it's not that they're easy. They have a very solid defence. They need it, in my opinion, to turn up. But I think they definitely can turn up. But they look tired. They don't look particularly creative, and they look kind of nullified by most oppositions at the moment. So I think City have a big chance going into that. I am worried about City going forward for the rest of the season. I think they've got the lead, but I think they could just cruise all the way through now. yeah, I think City ultimately have a sort of big advantage in this game. But as Ben mentioned as well, Manchester United could turn up if they have to. But a tight game for sure. But I can see City sort of nicking it for sure.
Yeah, 14-point gap at the top, which is quite depressing to say out loud, but that's sort of reality where it is. And yeah, it will be very interesting to see how those teams sort of approach the game. Obviously, we've seen City in recent times employ that false nine tactic against United and sort of bamboozle their defenders in that way. And it'll be interesting to see what Pep does against United and vice versa. But Luke, the game I guess you'll be focusing on Monday night, West Ham at home to Leeds. West Ham, who we should put the table graphic up to 6th place and obviously 2 points away from the top 4 spot. Against a very, we all know the danger of Leeds. Basically, you play, you can try and control the game away from them, but they'll still have enough pace and technician, and Rafinha is obviously in excellent form. I'm just rambling. What are your thoughts on this game coming up from a West Ham point of view?
It's a huge game for West Ham. I think West Ham are in a really good situation at the minute because the teams in and around us at the top of the table aren't picking up that many points. And I just think kind of this Leeds game, if West Ham win, I think it's really is a statement of intent in saying that, yeah, we are going to stick around in this conversation for the top 4, the top 6, however optimistic you want to be about it. If West Ham lose, I think it's probably over, and I think we'll start to see West Ham slip down the table, if I'm being completely honest. But the fact that at this point in the season, we're still having a conversation about kind of what would a result against Leeds United mean for West Ham, and we're not kind of couching this on a conversation about being potentially relegated, I think says everything for me, and it makes me incredibly happy. So no, I think West Ham can go into this game relatively open-mindedly. I think they can go into it knowing that whatever happens, it's going to be okay. And I think that really does help them. And I'm quite excited to see kind of how Moyes sets up again. I didn't think I'd be saying that sentence this season. And I think it'll be an interesting matchup because West Ham have a very kind of clear style of play this year, which is, of course, the polar opposite of how Leeds United set up under Marcelo Bielsa. So it will be chalk and cheese. West Ham will probably have me watching through between my fingers. But that's just how it goes with West Ham this season. I think if you're going to watch out for one player, and the key battle in this game will be Declan Rice and Thomas Souček against whoever's in Leeds United central midfield, I think that is ultimately what will decide this. The other thing actually to bear in mind with West Ham is it's unclear who's going to start in goal. So Lucas Fabianski has been injured for the past couple of weeks. He didn't play last time out. He was replaced by Darren Randolph for the Manchester City game, who went down injured just into the second half, and couldn't kick the ball from then on in the match. So it's possible that Nathan Trott could play. But he's quite a good goalkeeper anyway, so it'd be interesting to see how he would get on anyway. So yeah, in terms of West Ham, the central midfield battle will be key, but it will also be very, very important in terms of who starts in goal, because that will be obviously just pivotal against someone like Patrick Bamford up front.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously you guys have a pretty stingy defense and Leeds are known for having a very potent attack, and at the other end it's sort of the opposite. It's sort of we sort of expect Antonio to feast on sort of the Leeds defensive lapses at the back. So should have goals for sure. Should be a game that has produced plenty of goals. So yeah, I feel like there's no other place to wrap up other than sort of talking about one game individually that we're sort of excited for heading into this weekend. Ben, I'll start with you because I think it's pretty straightforward. It's the Manchester derby, isn't it?
Yeah, Manchester derby. Like I said before, Man United, they often turn up to these games, and I think they've won more at the Etihad more than City have won against Manchester United previously. So that leads to it. But then Manchester United's poor form, so who knows what's going to happen. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also very nervous because it could be a beating, but we'll see.
Anton, I turn to you next. Is there a game that you're looking forward to? I mean, Liverpool-Fulham on paper doesn't strike me as the most entertaining game, but given the sort of must-win status for both teams, you could argue with Fulham at the bottom of the table and Liverpool, scrapping to get back into that top 4 race. There is sort of a lot at stake for this game, which I don't think I would have said that months ago.
No, absolutely. But I'm tied between two games. I think the Chelsea-Everton game would be an interesting one to see whether Tuchel takes a slightly different approach to the one he did against Liverpool, and whether Everton can maybe produce a result there. But I think the Liverpool-Fulham game, whilst it could perhaps be the most boring stalemate we've seen all season, I think Fulham have something to play for. I think from a Fulham perspective, they look like they're going forward. They played really well against Spurs. In my opinion, I think they've been in really good form, and I'm interested to see whether Fulham can inflict the 6th defeat on Liverpool actually at Anfield in a row. And I think it's a promising time for Fulham. And looking from a Fulham perspective, as I said, I think that's going to be quite an interesting game.
Yeah, Luke. I'm curious to know if it isn't West Ham Leeds. I assume it's West Ham Leeds, but correct me if I'm wrong. But what are you looking forward to this week?
Not a Premier League game. I'm actually most intrigued by Dundee United versus Celtic tomorrow. So Rangers are currently kind of at the time of recording 2-0 up against St Mirren. If it stays the same, Celtic would need to win tomorrow in order to kind of keep their title hopes alight. Of course, they're not going to win the title, but basically, if they don't win tomorrow, the title is Rangers. So yeah, I think that's the game to watch simply because there's so much on the line. Celtic have been in complete disarray since Christmas. And yeah, I mean, something a little bit different. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep an eye out on tomorrow because of the ramifications in terms of, I think the fallout on social media as well will be quite something as well. So yeah, that's something to definitely whet the appetite on Sunday afternoon. That's a 12 o'clock kickoff.
Yeah, neo-Leninless Celtic side who have sort of a fall from grace in sort of way up north of the border, which has been very interesting. And obviously, Steven Gerrard receiving a lot of praise and plaudits at the moment, and rightfully so, at Rangers. And who knows if Liverpool spot? I don't want to project him as a Liverpool manager anytime soon, but obviously that is sort of the path for most Liverpool fans. And Anton, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly he seems primed for that Liverpool job at some point in the future. I will, and people who watch this obviously see I've been wearing a Gladbach jersey this whole time. They're playing Leverkusen at the moment, which is two really good teams. In fact, I think Gladbach have just got a penalty, which is interesting. It's not been the greatest game so far in 57 minutes, still goalless, but if Gladbach score a penalty, obviously that'll be big for Marco Rosa's team, who's been struggling at the moment. And then obviously, instead of watching Aston Villa versus Wolves, I'll be watching Bayern Munich versus Dortmund, the Klassiker. The two not really the two top teams in Germany, because obviously Leipzig is second place at the moment, but should be an entertaining game nonetheless. So with that, thank you to Ben, Anton, Luke for joining me. Obviously, you've seen for the last few minutes the social medias to follow has sort of been floating around below, so just pause the video or something if you want to stop and capture someone's particular Instagram or Twitter accounts. But we'll be back. We'll be back next week talking, I guess, going through Champions League, any major results or major stories from this weekend, and obviously previewing next weekend as well. And yeah, just a quick plug as well. Just follow our social medias, Raw Sports social medias, for those interviews. Like I said, sort of scheduling is sort of preventing any clarity at the moment, but just keep an eye on those, and we will alert you to when they come out. So thank you for watching along, and hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back soon. Thanks.